that's a lot of the stuff that's being recommended by some of these mummy bloggers and the people that are selling the oils.
And for kids too.
Yeah, and you know what, it's really potentially quite dangerous for children to be ingesting these things. So they're not really, the only people that seem to be recommending the oils be ingested are the people at doTERRA. Even qualified aromatherapy practitioners who train to do this don't recommend ingesting the oils for the most part. It's not something that
and I don't you think? I mean, it's quite sinister and quite horrible, really, because you have a look at some of this. There's a really great piece in the New Yorker by Rachel Munro who says, they've looked at who actually makes the money, and the distributors don't end up making a substantial income, but they tend to stick with it because the benefits, often they're stay-at-home mums, they find their social connections and what feels like a creative outlet, which, so it's really playing on those, good human tendencies.
Absolutely, the people making the money are the people at the top of the tree, not the people that they're signing up underneath them. Usually what happens is that you have to buy a certain amount of product to stay in the system, if you like, and so they end up with just a whole lot of really overpriced oils.
Right. So to those out there listening across the country who would have kind of be very, very surprised about essential oils, that they're hearing this, and back to the story about essential oils being used in primary schools and daycare centres, where would you err on this particular issue, Nikki?
I would err on the side of don't do it. on the side of caution. I mean, really, I don't think that schools need this kind of stuff. And I can see how it would have happened. There will be a mum in that school community who is selling the oils and who's seen an opportunity and thought, this is a good idea, and she's been sold a line that, you can help your kids by doing this, and she's...
And impede the passage of viruses or something like that, I saw was one of the claims.
There's some claims that are fairly unsubstantiated being made about some of this stuff. And so that's how it's happened. But I really think, when you hear... I'm not an expert on oil, so I'm not going to make any recommendations, but when you hear a neurosurgeon saying that it's potentially going to cause epileptic seizures, then that's something to take notice of. And I would
that was Professor Gareth Parry, who's an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for Services to Neurology. He was saying exactly that, because we've had a couple of people saying get some experts on.
I would suggest that he would be pretty good, authority on this compared to a mummy blogger,
But also get some experts on, but then also, look at some real research. I mean, a lot of people think, I'm going to do my research and I'm going to Google some stuff or read the marketing information that doTERRA has put out. Well, you have a responsibility to look further than that. Everyone, has access to a computer.
But every 10 years we get these multi-level marketing things that just pop up, those fads, and they last for a while and everybody gets burned and eventually they go away.
I think pre-social media, though, this is the difference with this, is that it's, the spread is a lot broader and a lot faster.
Nikki,
social media has really facilitated this, I think, in this particular case with doTERRA.
Great to have you on, Nikki. And a lot of feedback coming through here. Went to an essential oil night a friend was hosting. I'm a registered nurse and was blown away at what was being promoted. especially the injection of oils.
What?
Injection? Oh, God.
Very scary. And a lot more where that came from. It's great to have you on what a wonderful panel this afternoon. Emma Espin and Peter Elliott, thank you so much. Sean Wallace Chapman back with you tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Ki te whakarongo mai koe, ki te reo irarangi a Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, a horrific day on New Zealand roads leaves 9 dead, including 5 members of a single family north of Taupo. We'll have all the details of the crashes, and the country's top road policing cop joins us live. Councillor James Casson fronts up after his comments on the Christchurch terror attack, and what did he mean by calling for retribution and extreme violence in the wake of the 2016 terror attack in France? We'll have the latest on Jacinda Ardern's whirlwind first trip to China. It's still very wet in West Coast as residents try to clean up all the rubbish that flowed downstream of Fox Glacier, but the power's finally back on in Haast, and how teenagers from gang families are eyeing up a future career in the police thanks to a high school program.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. An 11-year-old boy is the sole survivor of a crash that killed 5 of his family members near Taupo. The crash was one of 3 that made up a horror morning on New Zealand's roads, leaving 9 dead around the country. Jordan Bond reports.
The single vehicle crash happened on Tirohanga Road near the Kinleith Forest at about 8:20 this morning. 5 people died, while a 6th was airlifted to hospital with serious injuries. A helicopter paramedic, Graham Harvey, says the scene was horrific. The Mayor of Taupo, David Trewavis, believes it's a local family. A second crash in Ashburton killed 3 people, including what's believed to be a woman and 2 young children. Senior Sergeant Matt Emery says a teenager was taken to Christchurch Hospital in a serious condition. Call Jordan Bond, TNA.
The Prime Minister plans to clear up what she calls misreporting about Huawei when she meets China's leaders in Beijing in the next few hours. Jacinda Ardern is to meet Premier Li Keqiang and later President Xi Jinping during her whirlwind visit to the country. Last year, the GCSB rejected Spark's initial 5G plans involving Huawei, citing security concerns. Ms Ardern says she will explain the process behind the decisions and clarify that government had no direct involvement.
That's an opportunity for us, I think, to have a dialogue, to talk about the way the process has been undertaken to date and where it currently stands. There is a view, for instance, that Huawei has been banned. That's simply not true. So it is an opportunity, I think, to set out what has happened.
Jacinda Ardern says the decision was not influenced in any way by New Zealand's Five Eyes partners. The government expects to pass legislation banning most semi-automatic rifles by the end of next week, 4 weeks after the terrorist attack. The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, today introduced the proposed changes to Parliament, where they will tomorrow receive their first reading. The changes will ban semi-automatic rifles and military-style semi-automatics, with the exception of firearms such as .22 calibre rifles and shotguns with magazines that cannot hold more than 5 rounds of ammunition. The legislation will also set up a buyback scheme, allowing gun owners to hand over weapons and parts that have been made unlawfully. A Dunedin community advocate says former refugees are being forced to live in cold, damp and crowded conditions. The Valley Project has been providing support for 3 families who live in the Dunedin suburb of North East Valley. At one house, 5 children sleep across 3 single beds in a room that's cold and damp because it's the only room that gets fresh air. Community worker Charlotte Wilson says the families have tried to seek support from government services but have not had any success.
At the moment, my biggest task is trying to find urgent accommodation for one of these families that doesn't want to stay in a house that is making all of their family sick and that they don't feel safe in due to harassment from people driving up the street at night and shouting racial abuse and threats to their family.
Charlotte Wilson. Dunedin is expected to welcome its next group of refugees next month. A Hamilton City Councillor says a fellow councillor who criticised the commemorations for those killed in the Christchurch mosque attacks has breached the council's code of conduct. James Casson wrote on his Facebook page that whenever a memorial is held or a tear shed, the attacker wins. The Mayor, Andrew King, says the comments don't breach the code of conduct. Councillor Angela O'Leary disagrees and says it's up to the Mayor to deal with it.
He has the authority and, in fact, the responsibility, because he's the leader of council, to enforce that code of conduct. So I'm interested in his views and the CE's on that, because certainly in my understanding of the code of conduct, this is quite a serious breach.
Angela O'Leary says when councillors are required to behave with integrity and respect. An organisation helping migrant women says some Muslim women are too scared to wear a hijab in public. Shakti says some school children fearing for their mother's safety in the wake of the mosque attacks need counselling. Mariana Johnson reports.
A Shakti facilitator in Christchurch, Sakina Hussain, says the support for Muslims has helped her overcome her own fears of wearing a hijab in public. But many not directly affected by the terror attack are still afraid. She says Shakti has received help from some schools where students are afraid for their own mother's safety, and they are arranging support where needed. Ms Hussain says the organisation is also helping 13 women directly affected by the attacks, including some widows who lost their husbands. She says mental health and counselling is not often talked about in their culture, so Shakti is making sure that anyone affected by the attacks, either directly or indirectly, is receiving the support they need. Ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
It's 5:05. The Northern Mystics are searching for their first win of the ANZ Premiership season tonight when they face the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic. The Mystics lost to the Northern Stars in Auckland last night. Shooting statistics once again hindered the side with an overall shooting percentage of 68%. Coach Helene Wilson believes a quick turnaround will work in their favour and expects players to step up tonight.
Clarity in your role and believing in your own ability is the most important place to start. It's not actually about what I say to them or how I motivate them. It's got nothing to do with that. It's about knowing that you can go out there and do it, and they just have to step up and do it.
Helene Wilson. Lydia Ko's final round saw her finish just outside the top 10 at the LPGA's Kia Classic in California. Ko mixed 5 birdies with 4 bogeys and a stunning eagle on the par 4 16th hole. At 3 under for the round and 12 under for the tournament, Ko finished for a share of 13th. Stephen Adams' team, the Oklahoma City Thunder, have been beaten by the Dallas Mavericks by 106 to 103 in the NBA. Oklahoma City is assured of a place in the playoffs with 5 regular season games remaining. That's the news.
Hate speech.
Do I agree with white supremacist views? No, I hate them. I think they're abhorrent.
Free speech.
All people have common humanity and inherent dignity, and it actually is divisive to start singling out.
Setting the bounds for the debate.
It's already in play. They are doing it for Germany, they can do it for New Zealand.
Everything in moderation. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, a group of friends trying to build a co-housing complex say they're being stymied because they're considered developers, even though it's their first home. And after 10, adventurer Adrian Hayes on his K2 triumph and the loss of 2 New Zealand-based fellow climbers. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Meteo to midnight tomorrow. Northland through to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Central Plateau. Rain with isolated thunderstorms and localised downpours spreading east, clearing from the west overnight and tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Rain briefly heavy, easing and becoming fine overnight. 1 or 2 showers for Wellington, Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. For Bulla and Westland, showers clearing tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, also Central and North Otago. Mainly fine, a few showers developing in Canterbury later today, spreading to Marlborough and the ranges of Nelson for a time tomorrow. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers mainly about the coast, easing tomorrow. Westerly gales in the south easing. At the Chatham Islands, a few showers developing this evening, heavy rain for a time tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 5, you're with RNZ National.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Alex Perrottet here in the Auckland studio. You are listening to Checkpoint. 9 people have lost their lives in one of the deadliest days on our roads. 1 person died after their car left the road and crashed into the water near Auckland Airport early this morning. Hours later, 5 members of one family were dead after their Ford Falcon slammed into a tree on Tihohangas Road. That's near the Kinleith Forest, just before 8 a.m. The sole survivor was an 11-year-old boy who was seriously injured. Less than 2 hours later, a woman and 2 young children were killed near Ashburton, where 2 vehicles collided at high speed after one failed to give way at an intersection. A teenager who survived the impact after one car was split in half was taken by ambulance to Christchurch Hospital and remains in a critical condition. Now, in a few minutes, we'll speak to the Assistant Commissioner of Road Policing, Sandra Venables. But first, let's go just north of Taupo, where our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Dan Cook visited the Mokai Marae, where whānau and friends are coming to terms with the tragedy. Tohu Ka is a kaumatua at the marae and says it's devastating, losing 5 people from the same whānau.
I mean, say having 1 in there is bad enough, but when you have 5, then this anguish and the crying within, it's going to carry on for ages. I mean, 1's bad enough, 5 is just unbelievable in a tangihanga like this.
Now, Tai Hakoa Maui is also a kaumatua and says word of the crash has spread through the community and whānau, many of whom are in Australia.
The value of family at the expense of family. and the value of unity at the expense of unity. So I'll tell all my cousins and my aunties and uncles out there, ka nui te aroha, ka nui te aroha. And the marae is a great place for those situations, and for people who are down and out in those times, the marae is the perfect place.
Well, we can go now live to our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, who's at the scene of this morning's crash. Nita, what more can you tell us?
Kia ora, Alex. Yes, I'm standing right next to where this horrific crash happened this morning. There's not as much to see here now, some broken branches and a little bit of debris from where the car has left the road, but crash scene investigators were here for much of the morning. There's some evidence of that, some spray paint on the road and things indicating a little bit, but other than that, if you were driving past, you wouldn't know what had happened here this morning. It was awful. 5 people have lost their lives at this exact spot. We do know that not everyone travelling in that car was wearing seat belts, but the actual place where the crash has happened doesn't seem to have any obvious driving hazards. It's a relatively straight stretch of the road, and while it's very wet here now, the conditions this morning, I am told, have been were dry at the time. The spray paint that I mentioned that the crash scene investigators have left does indicate that the car may have veered off course onto the other side of the road before ending up in this ditch and crashing into the eucalyptus trees. We don't actually know what the cause of the crash was, and we won't know for some time. Crash scene investigators are expected, as well as coroners, to provide a full report into this at a later date.
Thanks very much, Nita. Nita Blake-Person there, just north of Taupo, where 5 people died in that horrific crash just early this morning before 8 a.m. 1 person survived. A 6th person has been taken to hospital. That survivor, an 11-year-old boy. Meanwhile, 2 young children and a woman were killed after a green station wagon and a white ute collided near Ashburton shortly after 10 o'clock this morning. Emergency services were called to the intersection of Mitcham and Hepburns roads, where it's thought one vehicle failed to give way, the high-speed impact splitting the green station wagon in 2, leaving metal and belongings strewn across the road and nearby paddocks. A baby capsule and a young child's car seat could be seen still intact on the back end of the green station wagon, the wheels of a pram lying next to it in a paddock. Senior Sergeant Matt Emery spoke to media at the crash site just a short time ago.
Yeah, so you say serious damage to that vehicle, split in half obviously, and then the other one has suffered extensive damage as well, but being newer, fitted with all the modern safety equipment, that driver's been able to get out of that vehicle.
Sergeant Emery said the driver of the ute, who was travelling west at the time, was probably saved because his car was a later model and in better condition than the station wagon.
Upon arrival, there's obviously 2 cars have been involved. Rather high-speed impact by the looks of things at the scene, and ambulance initially treated 1 person and took them directly to hospital, and sadly 3 others have lost their lives here at the scene.
Police say the identity of those killed in the crash had not been released, but he urged drivers to take care and be wary on what has been a horror day on New Zealand roads. And Sandra Venables is the Assistant Commissioner of Road Policing and Prevention. She joins us now. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Can we just talk about the Taupo crash first? We heard from Nita a bit earlier on. The 6th passenger in what looked to be like a simple sedan was taken to hospital. What do we know about use of seatbelts in that crash?
So I think it's too soon to start talking about that, although we do know that wearing your seatbelt will help prevent injury. So I want to be very careful about the specifics of these. It's been a horrific day today with 9 people losing their lives, and our thoughts go out to the friends and the family and colleagues of those people. But we are absolutely committed to reducing death and injury on roads, and we work alongside our road safety partners to do this, but we cannot do it alone. So we need everyone's help to keep our roads safe, and that is exactly that. Wearing your seatbelt, driving to the conditions, lowering your speed when you can to make sure that you are driving to the conditions and not driving impaired.
These are rural roads, as you're saying. We've got, I mean, just the amount of crashes from our yearly death toll on the roads that happen in the rural areas is amazing. I mean, the photos that the people viewing would have seen there, they can go to our website and see they're just horrific. A car just sliced in half. A miracle that someone from that car has actually survived. It seems, I mean, what's your message, I suppose, when people need to be cautious when they're approaching the major road in terms of giving way?
So speed is always a factor in regards to the degree or the outcome of a crash, so the degree of injury or what happens as an outcome of the crash. So if we can get people to lower their speeds, drive to the conditions, please put your seatbelts on. That would be a start. We just want everyone to be safe on our roads.
Must be difficult to get detail at this stage, but the first one this morning was actually in Auckland. It seemed like the car went into the Manukau harbour. Do you have any more detail about that incident?
No, I'm not going to talk about those specifics. They're all now a matter for an investigation and the coroner. But what I can say is we just want everyone to drive to the conditions, maintain their focus on the roads and keep their speeds down, especially if it's a wet day.
About 24 hours ago, we were looking better than last year's road toll as at the end of March. 9 people in one morning, I think, takes the road toll to 101 this year already. When was the last time you can remember 9 people losing their lives in a single morning?
Unfortunately, in this role, I get to hear of each death every day. So I think about 15 months ago, we also had another terrible day on our roads. But every death is one death too many. So I want to make sure that people understand that we want to save and make sure that people are safe on our roads all the time.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Sarah Venables there. She's the Assistant Commissioner of Road Policing and Prevention. We're just coming up to 17 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on email as well. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A Hamilton City councillor who criticised the commemorations for those killed in the Christchurch terror attacks plans to visit his local mosque this Friday to apologise. James Casson, who also works for Immigration New Zealand, wrote on his Facebook page that whenever a memorial is held or a tear shed, the attacker wins. Mr Casson told me just a short time ago he's sorry if he caused offence, but he does stand by his comments.
The flowers, the tears and everything else, of course it's going to happen. We expect that to happen. But my point was to try and move on with normal life, because the more we get entrenched, the longer it's going to take, because, armed police at mosques and everything, the followers have to walk past armed police each day to go to their mosque, and that's not right for them either. Things have to get back to normal, otherwise terrorism wins. That's the point I was trying to make.
Right, so you're saying that it's not prudent for the police to still be guarding mosques and other public places?
Well, it was prudent at the time because you don't know what you're going to get straight afterwards. But I think we need to, and for the sake of the Muslim people that go to the mosque to pray, is to try and get back to normal where they don't have to walk past armed police anymore.
Have you reached out and spoken to the Muslim community since the controversy over your comments?
Yeah, I have. And, look, I've got, I work with a few Muslim officers or police officers from Egypt and other places in Nigeria when I was with the United Nations in East Timor, and I've got, huge support from them. But I've also reached out to Dr. Mohsen, who's head of the Waikato Muslim Society or Association, and I've arranged to go meet both him and the faithful there at the Hamilton Mosque on Friday at 2 p.m. It's their prayer time, and I wish to speak to them face-to-face to apologise.
Right, so you will apologise to the Muslim community. Have you heard back from them already about perhaps how they feel about the New Zealand police and what they've done to protect them and support them since the shootings on March the 15th?
No, I haven't, and that's one of the things I'll talk to Mr. Mohsen about. But it's this is me going as Councillor Casson to just to try and assure them. I'm not sure, and I'm sure they will accept me willingly. But just to assure them that my post was never meant to offend anyone. It was just my thoughts on how we should progress as a society, because that madman that killed 50 innocent people is the man who caused that. And with some of the vitriol I'm getting at the moment, I kind of seems that people are kind of linking me with that guy.
Right. So you talk about the vitriol that's been shared online. I appreciate that you're apologising to the Muslim community as soon as you can. Your colleagues, including the Mayor, have distanced themselves from your comments, and you've talked about online vitriol. I want to take you back to comments you made on Facebook in July 2016, right after the terror attack in Nice. You talk about an invasion of European migrants into Europe, and to quote you word for word, you say, "It's time to get hard, time for strong measures, time for retribution and extreme violence to rid Europe of these scum." Do you stand by those comments?
Well, yeah, I do, because I was actually talking about the terrorists, not the refugees. So there were 2 terrorist attacks in Nice and Paris, and that was what I was referring to. And the boatloads of military-aged guys arriving on the beaches and wandering through Europe, which they've got some huge problems with at the moment. I was never referring to refugees as scum. It was the terrorists, and the terrorists are scum. The guy in Christchurch.
You talked about hordes of men, Middle Eastern men. There have not been hordes of terrorists. The tone of that post clearly targeting the Muslim and Middle Eastern immigration into Europe. Now you're sounding like you're scouting that back to it's just the terrorists.
Yeah, it was never meant to be a wholesale. And if you read there, it says not all refugees. I was referring to Helen Clark. Not all refugees were there for as refugees. There were some people that are going in there for different reasons. And I've just been reading the publications from Europe and that, where they've got big problems in Germany and Holland and France and that, where they've got huge problems with these guys.
James, is it responsible to go online as an elected representative and call for retribution and extreme violence? Since the shootings on March the 15th, how do you feel about those comments?
Well, no, if hindsight's a great thing, and if I had it, I wouldn't have had it. But those comments were made before I was a councillor as well. So, if anybody looked at my Facebook page or my political one, they would see there were no more like that. That was a sole thing. It's something that I'd probably said in anger at the time, which I really apologise for.
Well, you've just told us before that you stood by the views. Now you're apologising for them. So which is it?
No, I do. I do stand by them, but I still apologise if people have taken them the way that has been said. That I've called all refugees scum, which I have not.
Do these views colour your thinking and the decision making in your position as a councillor in Hamilton?
Oh, never at all. I've had a close association with the mosque here in Hamilton in my previous life as a police officer. So I've never. That doesn't colour my view at all. I have, like I said, I have Muslim friends, and they are supportive of me. They know the true James Casson, and they know the true James Casson is not a racist.
Well, these comments are made in the context of, a future election there in Hamilton as well. They're timed, they're careful, they're calculated. Who are you appealing to with those comments?
I wasn't really appealing to anybody. That wasn't anything to do with either gaining votes or losing votes or whatever else. It was just a moment I was having of reflection, and that could have been worded a lot better, or it could have not been put on Facebook at all. But I was not meaning to cause any sort of offence, and it was not trying to elicit any sort of emotive response. But obviously, it has on both sides. I've had death threats, and I've had lots of messages of support too, and some of the letters of support or messages of support I've had I don't need because they go too far the other way. So,
You're saying you got some messages of support going too far the other way. What does that mean?
Oh, well, you do get vitriol from some quarters, but then you get other supporters that say, oh, yeah, we love your comments, and they're from what you'd probably say right-wing sort of extremists as well.
So does it concern you that you're putting comments out there and you're getting agreement from people who you say are right-wing extremists. Does that worry you at all?
It does. It does worry me. That's why I have not responded to them. I know I've deleted them because I got a range of responses right from people of Muslim faith, saying they know who I truly am and that I didn't mean that, right through to people who want to cause harm to me, right through to people who are on the other spectrum, right wing. So it went right through society.
You had about 6,000 people vote for you last time. Do you think they know you well?
I hope they do. Not all the 6,000 people will know me well, but I think my actions in the community that I've been doing for the last 3 years speak for me as the true person I am. I'll leave it up to the voter whether I get voted in or not, and that's totally up to them. If people don't want to vote for me, that's all good, and that's up to them. If people do want to vote for me, that's good as well. But that's not up to me. That's up to the ratepayer and the voter.
To those voters, those people of Hamilton, including the Muslim community across New Zealand, what do you have to say? I'm very sorry if I've caused offence in any way. It was not intended. And if all those people knew me as a person, like my friends of all sorts of different ethnicities knew me, they would know that it was not meant in that way. So you're going off on Friday to apologise to the Muslim community. Are you hopeful that they will accept you and accept your apology?
I am hopeful. I have not had any negative feedback at all from the Muslim community personally. I've seen what has been on TV, but personally I have not had it. And I'm hoping that, with their faith, they've been pretty good. I think they've been pretty tolerant with what's happened. And I'm hoping they'll listen to me and listen to my apology.
And what are you going to do to prove to them that you are not trying to stir up those very voices that you heard from with words such as, it's time for retribution and extreme violence to rid Europe of this scum? I mean, how will you convince them that that's not going to happen again? All I can give them is, and I don't know what it's worth, but all I can give them is my word that that won't happen again. Like I said, that was a moment in 2016 that I put something on Facebook I shouldn't have, and people do things which they do regret afterwards. I wouldn't be the sole person on earth that's done that. Councillor James Casson talking to me a bit earlier. Immigration New Zealand says it does not support Mr Casson's comments, but they are an employment matter and it has declined to be interviewed. Just coming up to 28 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. Coming up in the program, Jacinda Ardern's whirlwind China visit, the message she plans to give China's leaders about Huawei. And refugees living in Dunedin say their houses are making them sick. We'd love your feedback, of course, on the James Casson interview or anything else you've heard tonight. You can text us on 2101. Also, we're on Twitter at CheckpointRNZ. We're also on Facebook, Checkpoint, or you can send us the old-fashioned almost email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susana Leatawa with the headlines.
An 11-year-old boy is the sole survivor of a crash which killed 5 of his family near Taupo this morning. The crash was one of 3 in a horrific morning on the country's roads, leaving 9 dead around the country. 3 people were killed in a collision at the intersection of Mitcham and Hepburns Road near Ashburton just after 10 o'clock. And a man died in Middlemore Hospital, where he was taken after his car went into the water near Auckland Airport early this morning. Legislation banning most semi-automatic rifles should be passed by the end of next week, 4 weeks after the Christchurch terror attacks. The Police Minister introduced the legislation today and it's expected to receive its first reading in Parliament tomorrow. The changes ban semi-automatic rifles and military-style semi-automatics, apart from .22 calibre rifles and shotguns with magazines restricted to 5 rounds of ammunition. The police say 211 firearms have been surrendered since March the 15th, and they have had almost 1,500 calls about changes to firearm laws. The Prime Minister says she will clarify what she calls misreporting about Huawei when she meets China's leaders in Beijing shortly. Jacinda Ardern is meeting with Premier Li Jinping and later President Xi Jinping during her 24 hours in the country. Last year, the GCSB rejected Spark's initial 5G plans involving Huawei, citing security concerns. Ms Ardern says the decision was not influenced in any way by New Zealand's Five Eyes partners. The Human Rights Commission wants the government to consider changing the law to protect religious groups against hate speech. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has said he wants to speed up the process to review the hate speech laws in the wake of the Christchurch massacre. The Commission's Chief Legal Advisor, Janet Anderson-Boudoir, says it's an anomaly that certain hostility is not outlawed by the Human Rights Act. It can be taken as aggravated factors when someone is sentenced in court, but they aren't currently crimes in themselves. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Madison Reedy joins me now in the not in Christchurch, are we?
I think we're in Auckland
We're
today.
in Auckland. I was in Christchurch a little bit. I'll see if I can remember where I am for the rest of this interview. You're going to talk to us about Infratil.
I am.
They've got rid
Infratil.
of one of their investments. What's going on there?
They have. So Infratil, the utilities investor, they've sold their 50% stake in an Australian university's student accommodation. So they originally bought into that in late 2016, but today they said that they're selling it to investment funds controlled by the financial firm AMP. They're selling it for about 162 million Australian dollars if you were in Australia. and they say that the reason they bought into student accommodation was originally because they thought that it did have good growth prospects, and it thought that this particular venture would almost act as its springboard into the sector and help it expand further into it. But they have admitted today that that obviously didn't prevail, that it didn't have the growth prospects that it hoped for. I spoke to the Chief Financial Officer, Philippa Harford, and she said that they disposed of the investment because it didn't eventuate into what they'd hoped. But they are also undergoing a strategic review of the rest of their investment portfolio too. So that includes things like public transport, energy. They've actually recently just invested in an Australian renewable energy company called Tilt Renewables. Also aged care and even a data centre and IT. So a pretty diverse portfolio of things there that they're certainly looking to slim down. So we could expect to see more on their selling block soon.
Right. And Ebert Construction, the receivers, of course, of that collapsed company, they've released their second report. What's in that?
So in that today, they confirmed that subcontractors who are owed $34 million almost definitely will not get paid any of it, which is pretty unfortunate there. So they're owed that $34 million. The receivers aren't actually the ones who would disperse that money to the subcontractors, because Ebert Construction is also in liquidation. So they've said that they won't be able to pass any money on to the liquidators. Hence, there won't be any money available to trades workers who are owed funds. But the receivers are also the receivers of the retention fund of Ebert Construction, which is what they went to court for last year to become the receivers of that. That money they can disperse to subcontractors. That holds some of the subcontractors' pay that's owed to them, not all of it. There was a bit of an issue there. They have been given $2.2 million of that so far, and they will see the rest of it. But again, that's only a very tiny portion of their pay. Former employees and Inland Revenue have been paid what they've been owed, so they've been paid a collective $1.7 million. Lawyers, in regards to that court process that I just mentioned, they've been paid nearly $300,000. Security guards, interestingly, were paid $116,000. That was when the 15 active sites, when Ebert went into construction, they were put in lockdown, so that obviously had security costs there. We shouldn't expect to see any more legal or security costs involved in this receivership. At the moment, there's $1.6 million in Ebert Construction's bank account, but the receivers are trying to recoup up to $18.6 million in invoices from other work done by Ebert before it went bust. Right. But they are struggling there. They've said that that's a complex and lengthy exercise, which is proving a bit difficult. And some former clients of Ebert's are actually withholding money up to $15 million. And they've said that that's because there's some defects in the work that Ebert Construction did did for them, and they're saying that the costs of fixing those defects would exceed the amount that they owe to EBIT, so they're refusing to pay up at the moment.
Yeah, they won't see that money if it gets handed over, that's for sure. All right, what can you tell us about the markets?
The NZX Top 50 index closed up just 0.09%. That's just a small 9 points to close at 9,853. Still at record highs there, still moving up in small amounts though. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 68.2 US cents, 95.9 to the Australian and 52.4 British pence.
Great. Thank you very much. Madison Reedy there with the latest in the business news. Coming up to 25 minutes to 6, the Prime Minister is in Beijing for just 24 hours as she looks to smooth tensions in the relationship between New Zealand and its largest trading partner. Ms Ardern cut her long-anticipated first trip to China as Prime Minister short after the Christchurch terror attacks. Our political editor Jane Patterson is in Beijing and filed this report.
The embassy in Beijing was first established in the 1980s, shortly after China and New Zealand developed diplomatic relations. Embassy staff have been in temporary quarters till last June, while the brand new embassy and residence was being built.
It is my pleasure to now officially declare the embassy open.
First order of the day for Ms Ardern was officially opening the embassy with her partner Clark Gayford and greeting the 70 or so staff. But there were more challenging issues ahead as Ms Ardern prepared to meet Premier Li Keqiang at the Great Hall of the People. One of the most pressing is Huawei, after the GCSB's initial rejection of Spark's bid to use the Chinese telco in its 5G network. It could end up in the hands of Cabinet Minister Andrew Little for a final decision, but Jacinda Ardern insists it's not a political decision.
How it sits with the vendor, that's a really important regulatory regime we have. It's there to support and strengthen New Zealand's national security interests, and it sits separate of us.
But there are other dynamics at play, including a strong pushback from Five Eyes partners, especially the United States, warning about the risks to national security. Ms Ardern insists that has no influence on New Zealand's decisions.
I see those as matters for those individual countries. Yes, they're members of Five Eyes, but actually New Zealand makes its decisions independently. Our process is set out by the TICSA legislation, not by Five Eyes or not by what any Five Eyes partner does.
So is there no political element to this at all in terms of our dealings with our allies or our Five Eyes partners?
No, there's not.
Last year, New Zealand, alongside Five Eyes partners, attributed cyber attacks to China. But Ms Ardern says that's not about singling out individual countries.
Because then I think we run the risk of not being attuned to the range of areas where which we may be confronting challenges.
China was singled out. It was attributed by the GCSB and other Five Eyes.
And so has
partners.
North Korea, and so has Russia. And I think what you find in those cybersecurity issues that we have faced, often we're caught up because there are vulnerabilities in our system, not necessarily because we're targets.
Ms Ardern was then welcomed to the Great Hall of the People before a formal meeting with Premier Li in the East Hall. He gave his condolences to the people of Christchurch after the terror attack. Ms Ardern thanked him for his words before settling into the business end of the talks. The official programme continues tonight when Ms Ardern will meet with President Xi Jinping, also at the Great Hall of the People. In Beijing for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And we'll get the latest from Jane Patterson after the 6 o'clock news. It's just gone 22 minutes to 6. An Iraqi refugee says his family has had to endure cold and damp living conditions in Dunedin because they weren't provided a full picture of the home they were moving into. He claims Immigration New Zealand made him sign a lease for an unsatisfactory property before seeing any photos. It's the latest in a series of complaints by refugees who've come to the city who say their accommodation isn't up to scratch and is even making them sick. Tess Brunton has more.
Jakob Alte and his family of 4 were granted asylum in New Zealand 12 years after they left Iraq. Along the way, they slept in tents, travelled illegally by boat from Malaysia to Indonesia, and spent 6 years in Cyprus. But when they arrived in an Auckland refugee resettlement centre late last year, Mr Alte says their housing troubles began. He says Immigration New Zealand got him to sign a rental agreement for a house in the Dunedin suburb of North East Valley without allowing him to see any photos first.
When I signed the contract, after that, show me the place. I refuse this, I not go there. She said to me, this one over. If accept, go. No accept, you can go alone, find a renter.
Water drips down the side of the house, leaking through the ceiling and onto the carpet. His wife has been left effectively housebound because the property's steep steps and dampness cause her chest pain and shortness of breath. Mr. Aute has ongoing knee and chest problems. Mr. Aute says he's asked for support, but no one has helped them.
I talked with the Red Cross, didn't have any solution about that, and also I contact with WINS about my case and bring 2 certificate about my health, but not have any solution. I think not care about my case. I don't know. I came to hear punishment. I don't know.
Just down the road, Mustafa Allo and his family live in another cold and damp house. It's large enough to house his 8 children, but it's old and too expensive to heat in the winter. The family's future is uncertain after their landlord issued them a notice to leave after a year and a half at the property.
Last year I go and ask about house in New Zealand. Should be I am refugee, I get house in New Zealand house. So they give me private house and too big, too expensive, it was damp, old.
Mr. Allo says all he wants for his family is stability. He hopes he can continue living in the neighbourhood they've made their home, but finding a place big enough for his family is going to be difficult, especially in an already stretched property market. Another refugee, Ahmed Al-Ghanim, who spoke through an interpreter, says the cold, damp conditions in his Dunedin home are making his family sick.
They have enough because they have the war in Syria. They suffer a lot in Syria when they have the war. They was looking for opportunity for them and their children to better life and safe. But when they came and they find this issue, like they feel they're still in war, it's not really the standard they wanted life for living with the children.
Calls to the landlord garnered no help. Mr. Al-Ghanim says he was told he could leave at any time, but finding affordable, adequate housing is easier said than done. 5 of their children sleep in one room with 3 single beds pushed together. It's cold and the floor beneath the carpet is damp, but it gets fresh air. Their parents sleep in the lounge with 3-month-old Ali. Their bedroom is unsuitable because it's too damp. The fridge door is filled with medicine. Their son Ali recently spent 3 nights in hospital because he couldn't stop coughing. Immigration New Zealand says in a statement it works with other agencies to ensure refugees are well connected and supported for their new lives in either government housing or private rentals. But the Valley Project community worker Charlotte Wilson says the families feel disempowered after seeking help from government services without success. Ms. Wilson says they should have healthy, affordable housing in the suburb of their choosing.
I feel ashamed that this is what our country has offered. We've said, we will house you, this can be your home, and this is what the situation is.
A new group of refugees is expected to arrive in Dunedin next month. Those who are already here hope it will be a warmer and drier welcome for the new arrivals. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
17.5 minutes to 6. Gun owners have until the end of September this year to hand in guns that will be rendered illegal by laws the government is fast-tracking through Parliament. The Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters announced this afternoon that Cabinet has today agreed on the Arms Amendment Bill following the Christchurch massacre. The bill seeks to ban semi-automatic weapons as well as military-style semi-automatics, with the exception of shotguns and low-calibre rifles such as .22s, which have limited ammunition capacity, and pistols. The government is still working on details of its buyback scheme for weapons that would become illegal, but Mr Peters says it's expected to cost between $1 and $200 million. He says it's necessary, that cost, to ensure that gun owners are treated fairly.
The reality is this is going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. If it's going to cost us more, we're going to have to find either savings somewhere else, but whatever it is, that is not the point we are concerned about. It is to treat people fairly who thought they had a legal entitlement to a weapon that's now going to be outlawed.
Winston Peters. The government expects its bill will be passed into law by the end of next week, exactly 4 weeks after the terrorist attacks in Christchurch. Now, the Police Minister Stuart Nash has rejected gun owners' complaints that the government is rushing the changes and will end up making mistakes.
Don't buy that whatsoever. Everyone I have spoken to, be they hunters, farmers, etc., has said you do not need a military-style semi-automatic or an assault weapon to go hunting or to do farm business. These are guns that are designed to kill people. The gun that the terrorists use, the AR-15, is a civilian equivalent of the M16, which was used by ground troops in Vietnam.
Stuart Nash says the government does not know how many weapons will be surrendered as part of the buyback scheme, but he says it's taking seriously suggestions that gangs might refuse to hand over prohibited weapons. Meanwhile, investigations are continuing across the Balkans into the man accused of the Christchurch massacre. The man, who's been charged with 1 count of murder to date, will appear on Friday in the High Court in Christchurch. He's believed to have toured Central Europe in both 2016 and 2018, passing through small towns and villages linked to battles between Russia and the Ottoman Empire over a century ago. The ABC's Linton Besser reports.
Through the centre of the pretty Bulgarian capital of Sofia, a tram runs from the St Kyriaki Cathedral down the hill to the city's central mosque, the Banja Bashi. The Sofia synagogue is just across the road. Locals proudly call this plaza the Square of Tolerance. But when Brendan Tarrant came to this small and impoverished Eastern European state, he showed little interest in the square. Instead, just 4 months before the Christchurch atrocity, he took a car into the hinterland in search of a war which came to an end 140 years earlier. Colonel Slavko Velkov says he came to Bulgaria for motivation. Until 2 weeks ago, Colonel Velkov was deputy chairman of the Bulgarian Parliament's National Security Committee. He travelled to strange places, Colonel Velkov says, that all have importance in Bulgaria's military history, especially the Russian-Ottoman War of 1877. Last November, Brendan Tarrant travelled north from the capital to Pleven.
Mr. Kacharmazov. Hello, Linton Besser from the ABC. Thank you for showing me.
He stayed here at the Kachaka guest house. That's the guest house owner, Jordan Kacharmazov, who says he was happy to greet him at the guest house because he was his first guest from Australia.
So this was the room? Room Brenton.
He seemed absolutely normal, Mr. Kacharmazov says. A bit cold and reserved. But I thought that was just his character. Mr. Kacharmazov had barely heard the news of the New Zealand attack before he received a call from the Bulgarian intelligence service. He immediately knew he had a gut feeling it was about this strange guest he'd had from Australia. And he thought that because he remembered noticing a stamp in his passport from Pakistan. And now police and intelligence services across the Balkans are trying to retrace his steps to be sure he had no local assistance.
Linton Besser with that report. West Coast residents are continuing to grapple with the aftermath of flooding. This is a week after the region was hit by record-breaking rainfall. 10 trailer loads of rubbish from an old landfill site near the Fox Glacier is spread downstream and along kilometres of coastline, while 20 residents near a burst stop bank have spent another night out of their homes and a day waiting for answers. Katie Todd has more.
As the sun rose over the west coast, tourists and locals arrived with bags and buckets to clean up tons of overflowing rubbish from an eroded landfill on the Fox River, the site of the once pristine Okarito Beach, which is 30 kilometres north of the river mouth, brought local resident Mike Bilodeau to tears.
Tops of bottles, jugs, buckets, lots of shredded plastic bags, tiny little pieces of it, and that stuff gets caught up in all the seagrass and the gorse that's out there in the water. Car tires, car bumpers, just everything, big and small.
Clean-up efforts came to a halt this afternoon as more rain began to fall. but Mr Bilodeau is due to meet with the West Coast Regional Council, Department of Conservation and Westland District Council shortly to discuss what more can be done. He's hoping it may be possible to fund helicopters and machinery to get the situation under control. Another Okarita resident, Cliff Goodwin, says that will be needed for hard-to-reach beaches further along the coast.
I mean, the locals can walk along our local beach, but it's pretty hard to get to some of these faraway beaches. Like, one of the beaches takes a good day to walk down, and then if you're coming back, with that much rubbish, it's just impossible. So you really need the big infrastructure and helicopters and that sort of stuff, really. Slightly
further north at the Waiho River, where a bridge collapsed last week, there's been more frustration for about 20 residents. Those on low-lying land were advised to leave their homes and move to higher ground last night after a stop bank burst near their properties on Friday, and another 150 millimetres of rain fell on the district last night. The residents were meant to meet with the Regional Council today to discuss permanent options for rebuilding the stop bank, but the evacuations put the meeting on hold. Deputy Mayor Latham Martin says the council will be looking at long-term solutions once the immediate problems are resolved.
Waiho Bridge is out, so they don't have immediate access. The state highway itself is severely damaged. Access roads into their own property is severely damaged, so they're working hard to restore that access and ensure that their properties are safe and protected. In terms of long-term solutions for the south side of Waiho and the affected areas, there has been no determination on that yet, but I understand that that is of concern to a lot of those residents.
Meanwhile, in other parts of the district, today has brought relief. Power was restored to about 250 people in the township of Haas this morning for the first time in 6 days. And Met Service meteorologist April Clark says there is more dry and stable weather on the way.
The next couple of days are looking a lot drier, especially starting from tomorrow. So still a few more showers today, and then tomorrow and Wednesday are looking dry for the West Coast.
The total cost of the damage from the floods is yet to be confirmed, but councils estimate it could be in the millions. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
It's 9 minutes to 6. I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback. Get in touch on the text 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on email as well, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A comedian with no political experience has raced ahead in Ukraine's presidential election. Exit poll suggests Vladimir Zelensky, who plays the president in a satirical TV show, is expected to beat the incumbent President Petro Poroshenko in the first round of voting today. The BBC's Jonah Fisher has more detail.
Fact is very quickly catching up with fiction in Ukraine. This was the moment that a comedian who plays the president in a TV show found out that he was beating the real president by more than 10 percentage points. These are just exit polls, but the political establishment here has been shaken.
What's your reaction to these exit polls?
Great. This is the first fight.
Don't stop, please. Let's go.
Yes, I'm very happy. I'm here, but this is not the final actions.
And you sure you'll win in the second round?
I think so.
Okay.
We'll see.
We will see.
Not very good.
I spent a day with Mr. Zelensky during the election campaign. At the time, his grasp of politics was weaker than his understanding of British comedy.
Benny Hill, yes, is more understandable than Monty Python. For me, Monty Python is better. I'm sorry.
Ukrainians feel they know how Mr. Zelensky would perform as president because they've seen him star in a television show as a teacher called Vasily Goloborodko, who turns into a principled, honest president. This is the man Mr. Zelensky looks set to face in the second round.
Mr. President, are you feeling confident?
Immediately after the voting, thank you.
Ukraine's real president, Petro Poroshenko. 5 years ago, the billionaire was swept to power in the aftermath of a street revolution. But he looks to be paying the price for the slow pace of change. The big loser from today looks to be Yulia Tymoshenko, the darling of revolutions past. This will be the third time she's missed out on the presidency. Whoever ultimately wins will be confronted with Ukraine's very serious problems, not least relations with Russia and a war in the east that's killed 13,000 people. This election isn't over yet, but tonight in Ukraine, it feels like a political earthquake. Voters rejecting the old in favour of something new, entertaining, and almost completely undefined.
Jonah Fisher there in Kiev at 6 minutes to 6. Back home, children of Kawaro's established gang families are seeking futures in the police, thanks to an unconventional program at the local high school. With lived experience of crime, drugs and violence, and a determination to protect others from similar trauma, police say these teenagers would make excellent recruits. Kerry Wellham filed this report from Kawaro. The names of the young people she's speaking to have been changed.
On a wet day in the eastern Bay of Plenty, geothermal steam clings to the hills around Kawaro. At the back of Tarawera High School is an old classroom where new dreams are being built for the young people of this town.
So yeah, AOS is just another level of policing, a higher level.
Yeah.
So they do a lot more.
This is the Introduction to Police Studies course being run in a town where attitudes to police have long been hostile. Many of the 12 students in this class are children of some of Kawaro's most entrenched gang families. While the class carries on around her, Olivia explains that 2 of her brothers are Black Power, her uncles and koro are mongrel mob. If she has her way, Olivia will be the first person in her family to join the police.
What my brothers and dad have done, just want to go the other way.
Olivia is working harder in police studies than she has for any subject. She wants to specialise in family harm prevention.
Because I've seen it and I know what it feels like and it doesn't feel great.
Olivia's experience of domestic violence is driving a determination to help others. The Introduction to Police Studies curriculum was developed by Unitec and piloted at 2 Rotorua schools last year. Sergeant Shane Talby of Whakatane Police helps teach the course at Tarawera High. Kira wants to be a dog handler. She hopes for a brighter future for Kawaro.
Because there's been a lot happening in Kawaro at the moment, like with all the drugs and the gangs and the shootings and stuff. But I think it can get better in the future.
It's 5 weeks since a local mongrel mob member was killed in a standoff with police, having earlier discharged a firearm and robbed a bank. In March last year, 48 people were arrested and $3 million in assets seized during raids centred around Kawaro's drug trade. The crimes and others continue to reverberate through the community. The town of 7,000 has an unemployment rate of 25%. A geothermal dairy factory and a particle board factory are being built, but there are few current employment prospects in Kawaro. Tarawera's principal, Helen Tuhoro, says local police have worked hard at connecting with the town's teenagers, and now they are helping introduce policing as a career pathway.
When police first came into the school, they were referred to as pigs. Then they became the cops, and now our youth aid officer's name, George. So that's the change that's happened.
Mrs. Tuhoro is not surprised to hear children from gang families say their parents will be proud of them entering the police.
A lot of them don't want them to follow in their footsteps. That's not everybody, obviously, but at the end of the day, for most of our whānau, they want the absolute best for their kids. And an awful lot of them, they actually just want them to have better than they had. And whatever their circumstances are, they're not going to step in their way. And I can't wait for the day that we have one of our students graduate from police college and a parent maybe turns up in their patch to support them and awhi them. Wouldn't that be cool?
Ella wants to work in road policing.
I lost my 2 siblings to drunken driving and reckless driving, and I want to be able to stop that and and help them to drive home safely.
Ella's father is a senior figure in the Kawerau mongrel mob, and 2 of her brothers are patched members. She says her family is proud of her interest in joining the police. What would she do if she caught her father speeding?
Pulled up. Give him a ticket. He's not special.
The year-long course offers students 25 NCEA Level 3 credits and covers topics they will encounter if they apply for police college, such as fitness, legislation and ethics. I Kawerau, ko kiri walam tēnei.
Delightful story. Sounds like some of those students certainly have what it takes. Time now for a little bit of your feedback before the news at 6 o'clock. Our interview with James Casson. Mike in Christchurch says being hyper-militant on the offence when white or Euro people are threatened, but tusking when defending non-whites a short time after the fact. This reads as a deeper bias to me, as does calling the gunman a madman, which implies a loner acting without the broad societal support that the killer most definitely enjoys. Thanks for that, Mike. Joe says here, Councillor Casson should learn to stop digging, while Tim from Whangarei has got in touch and says your councillor interviewee, James Casson, repeats several times his apologies for offensive comments, each time adding, if I have offended anyone, the classic half or non-apology, the apology that's not a real apology at all. Do get in touch. 2101 is the text, and we'll see if we can get to more feedback after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei Atawa DNA. A local Gaumatua says a car crash which killed 5 people from the same family near Taupo is devastating. The crash happened on Tirohanga Road near Kinleith Forest at about 8 o'clock this morning. An 11-year-old boy had to be freed from the car and was airlifted to hospital with serious injuries. Tohu Ha is a Gaumatua at the Mokai Marae and says losing one person would be bad enough, let alone 5 people from the same whānau.
I mean, say having one in there is bad enough, but when you have 5, then this anguish and the crying within, it's going to carry on for ages.
Tohu Ha of the Mokai Marae. Cabinet has today approved changes to gun laws in the wake of the Christchurch terrorist attack. The legislation bans most semi-automatic rifles, with the exception of low-calibre rifles and shotguns with limited magazine capacity. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says the legislation will get its first reading in Parliament tomorrow and be passed into law by the end of next week.
This will mean that within 4 weeks of the Christchurch terrorist attack, New Zealand will have passed legislation banning all military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles, the rated parts used to convert guns into military-style automatic weapons, and all high-capacity magazines.
Winston Peters. The police say 211 firearms have been surrendered since the afternoon of the Christchurch terror attacks more than 2 weeks ago. There have been almost 1,500 calls to the police 0800 information line about the changes to gun laws. A Hamilton City Councillor, under fire for criticising the country's response to the Christchurch mosque attacks, says he will apologise to the Muslim community. James Casson wrote on his Facebook page that whenever a memorial is held or a tear shed, the attacker wins, and is also critical of changing the gun laws. Mr Casson says some have taken the posting out of context, but others have been understanding.
Right from people of Muslim faith saying they know who I truly am and that I didn't mean that, right through to people who want to cause harm to me, right through to people who are on the other spectrum, right wing.
James Casson says he didn't mean to offend anyone. An independent inquiry has criticised the Waitemata District Health Board for inadequate monitoring a mentally ill patient. The report on the July 2016 incident says a patient admitted to a psychiatric intensive care unit managed to leave the hospital, likely by climbing over a fence. Charlie Drever reports.
The patient was deemed a risk to himself and others and was placed on 15-minute observations. However, the report found the allocation of 15-minute observations were not followed, and there was confusion regarding who was responsible for observing the patient. The patient was found 2 days after his disappearance by police. The Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner, Kevin Allen, recommended the Waitemata DHB provide a written apology to the man and his family and amend its observations policy to improve guidance about the handover process. This is Charlie Drever.
A Waikato councillor says they are doing what they can to stop children playing on a Ngaruawahia rail bridge where an 11-year-old girl died. Coroner Gordon Martinga has just released his report on the death of Maureen Rameka in March last year. He said while her death was an accident, it was preventable. Councillor Janet Gibbs says the community has been thinking hard about how to stop children risking their lives.
People had said when they've seen children near the rail bridge, or in fact, you know, any sort of dangerous activity near rail, road and water, the community is speaking up and saying, "Oh, don't do this, you know, you need to be more careful."
Janet Gibbs says they've been running education programs in schools and the community board has been subsidising entry to local pools to provide a safe alternative to jumping into the river from the bridge. The grandmother of the 3 surviving children of the Australian terrorist Khalid Sharif has appealed to the federal government to help save the trio. The children, aged 8, 16 and 17, are trapped in a refugee camp in northeast Syria after they managed to get out of the last Islamic State stronghold of Baghouz. Their grandmother, Karen Nettleton, says she is extremely worried about the conditions in the camp.
There's a lot of sickness going around there. Hude's got a foot injury. She has no feeling in her foot, so it's very difficult for her to get around. And Zainab is 7.5 months pregnant and she's feeling very fatigued.
Nettleton, whose grandchildren are in a Syrian refugee camp. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he won't risk lives to help the family. It's 6:05. All Blacks halfback Aaron Smith insists he never considered a move overseas after this year's Rugby World Cup. The 30-year-old has recommitted to New Zealand rugby and the Highlanders until the end of 2021. Smith says he had offers from France and Japan, but he says he's got unfinished business in New Zealand. He says he also can't turn his back on the lifestyle here.
I talk to a lot of people around them signing overseas and they tell you, the grass ain't greener. It's tough, the rugby's different, the cultures are not the same, they don't look after you or your partners as well. It's a bit of the wild, wild west.
Aaron Smith. In football, the season is over for Wellington Phoenix defender Lewis Fenton after breaking 2 toes in the win against Newcastle Jets on Saturday. He underwent surgery this morning after breaking his 2nd and 3rd toes in his right foot. The normal recovery time frame is approximately 12 weeks. In tennis, Roger Federer has defeated a hobbling John Isner 6-1, 6-4 for his 101st career title at the Miami Open. Isner struggled to continue late in the 2nd set on Sunday, hampered by pain in his left foot. Federer, who won his 4th Miami title, broke Isner 3 times in a blazing opening set, but the American fought back in the 2nd, levelling the set 3-3 and 4-4 before the pain made it difficult to continue. Federer took the final 2 games for the victory. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights we have a window on the world of perfume, in which the chemist Andrew Holding tries to recreate famous scents using formulas written in his grandfather's notebook. This week's sportscaster Peter Lamp tries to put his team's humiliation at the hands of the Crusaders behind him. And then there's Laura Morrison's travels through Africa with Charlie. Charlie being a 1958 Maori miner. That's on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from After the News at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Central Plateau. Rain with isolated thunderstorms and localised downpours spreading east, clearing from the west overnight and tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Rain briefly heavy, easing and becoming fine overnight. 1 or 2 showers for Wellington, Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. For Bulla and Westland, showers clearing tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Central and North Otago, mainly fine. A few showers developing in Canterbury later today, spreading to Marlborough and the ranges of Nelson for a time tomorrow. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers mainly about the coast, easing tomorrow. Westerly gales in the south easing. At the Chatham Islands, a few showers developing this evening, heavy rain for a time tomorrow. It's 6:08. You're with RNZ National.
And it's Alex Perrottet here with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Jacinda Ardern says her meeting with the Chinese Premier during her first trip to China has advanced trade and a range of other issues. Ms Ardern is in the middle of a very brief but high-level visit to the Chinese capital, where her first item of business was to formally open the new New Zealand embassy. But there were plenty of other challenging issues during her meetings. Our political editor Jane Patterson is in Beijing and joins us now. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Alex.
So what's the PM had to say about the meeting, firstly with Premier Lee?
So we left the Great Hall of the People while Ms Ardern was still in a meeting and then a banquet, but she issued a statement a short time ago in which she said she and Premier Lee Keqiang had advanced trade along with other issues. Now, I think the most important thing out of that statement was an agreement from China that they would push along and hope to progress those FTA upgrade talks. There have been 6 rounds. They're heading into a 7th. So it's definitely a feeling that they're dragging on. So to get that acknowledgement that at least they'll get things moving, will be welcomed positively by New Zealand. No indication, of course, that it would actually be the upgrade would be settled, but I think they would welcome anyway the fact that they will get a nudge along. Also, a couple of relatively standard agreements that usually come out of these meetings, one on climate change and the other on tax.
Right. Now, Jane, anything of note that she didn't address?
Look, interesting issues are both Huawei and cybersecurity that have, of course, been the topic of much debate ahead of these meetings. Now, this morning when we spoke to Ms Ardern just after the embassy opening, she talked about Huawei, and it was very interesting. She was really trying to distance the government itself from any decision that may end up happening with Huawei. She said at the moment, after the GCSB initially rejected the bid from Spark to use Huawei for the 5G network, that it was really up to the vendor, i.e. the private company Spark, in terms of whether it would progress with that proposal. However, in the end, it could end up with Cabinet Minister Andrew Little to make a final decision on whether Huawei would be allowed to operate in that capacity, because of course Huawei products are used in New Zealand, but specifically in that network, that 5G network, could be up to him. So, it will be a political decision, and she brushed that off, saying actually that's a hypothetical and we haven't got there. And another one, cybersecurity, that wasn't directly addressed in Ms Ardern's statement. Of course, China was attributed by New Zealand and other Five Eyes partners late last year as being responsible for cyber attacks. Now, Ms Ardern she didn't address that in a statement, but she was asked herself what security measures she was taking herself when she visited here. She acknowledged that some of her staff had not bought their own cell phones. They were worried about security, about network security. She said that she had bought cell phone. She wouldn't say whether it was her own personal cell phone she uses in New Zealand, but she said she can be communicated she's over here, but she also said she's taken the same precautions basically that she would visiting any other country.
Right. Now, of course, this trip, the government's been criticised, particularly late last year, for the delays with this trip. It's been shortened, obviously, as a result of the Christchurch attacks. Was there any mention of those attacks in the conversation?
Yes, that was the first thing that Premier Lee said to Ms Ardern when they came through to the East Hall, a huge big rectangular table where they sit opposite each other and have those formal talks. When he got up and greeted Ms Ardern, the first thing he said was his condolences to the families of the Christchurch attack, that he hoped that those injured would recover quickly, and he also sent his wishes to the families of those who had been attacked. And Jacinda Ardern thanked him, and then they got on with the business end of those talks. Now, it's still early afternoon here in Beijing, so we're just in the middle of the day. In the next hour or so, she'll go back to the Grand Hall of the People for her second meeting with President Xi, and then she will hold a function for New Zealand business people at the newly opened embassy later this evening.
Great. Thank you very much for the update. Jane Patterson, our political editor, joining us there from Beijing, where the Prime Minister is on a whirlwind trip. It's just hit 13 minutes past 6. 9 people have died today in 3 separate car crashes after a weekend which claimed 5 other lives on the road. An 11-year-old boy was trapped and had to be freed from a car and airlifted to hospital in a crash in which 5 members of the same family died, about 30 kilometres north of Taupo. That was this morning. And in Ashburton, a woman and 2 young children died, and a teenager is also in hospital in a critical condition after that accident. Jordan Bond has more.
14 people have died on the roads over the last 3 days. The Assistant Commissioner of Road Policing, Sandra Venables, says today was horrific and every death is one too many. Ms Venables says speed is always a factor and the same messages remain.
So if we can get people to lower their speeds, drive to the conditions, please put your seatbelts on. That would be a start. We just want everyone to be safe on our roads.
One of the helicopter paramedics that attended the crash on Tirohanga Road, north of Taupo, says it was a horrible scene to arrive to, a fast-moving car that hit a solid tree. Graham Harvey says around 20 emergency personnel were on site, numerous police, 3 fire trucks, multiple ambulances and 2 helicopters.
So we landed in the Greenlee Rescue helicopter from Taupo and greeted by quite a tragic scene. It was quite a hard scene to walk into, and we had a patient that we were treating, Hamilton were treating at the time, so we were able to support them and provide some treatment for that patient who was then airlifted through to Waikato Hospital.
A spokesperson for the hospital says the 11-year-old boy is this afternoon in a stable condition, but with serious injuries. Taupo Mayor David Trewavis believes the deceased are a local family.
Which is certainly a tragedy for our local community, that's for sure. It appears to be a family travelling to north that's veered around a corner and unfortunately collided with the tree. It's early indications from the police that the road and conditions weren't a factor in the incident.
In Ashburton, a woman and 2 young children died in a T-bone crash which split a station wagon in half. Senior Sergeant Matt Emery says it was quite clearly a high-speed accident, with the cars heading perpendicular to each other.
Ambulance initially treated 1 person and took them directly to hospital, and sadly 3 others have lost their lives here at the scene. Still to be confirmed, but we believe there's an adult woman and 2 young children have died as a result of the crash, and a teenager has been taken to Christchurch Hospital in a serious/critical condition.
The other person involved, who was driving a ute, has moderate injuries. Mr Emery says it was a relatively new model and had more safety features. Overnight, a man in Auckland crashed into water near Auckland Airport at about 1 a.m. He was taken to hospital in a critical condition but has since died. As of today, 101 people have lost their lives travelling on our roads since the start of this year. For Checkpoint, I'm Jordan Bond.
16 minutes past 6. There's been general condemnation of comments made by a Hamilton City councillor who criticised New Zealand for commemorating those killed in the Christchurch mosque attacks. But James Casson says his Facebook post that whenever a memorial is held or a tear shed, the attacker wins, was never meant to cause offence. And he stands by his comments made back in 2016 that have resurfaced, where he calls for retribution and extreme violence to rid Europe of Middle Eastern refugees. He used the word scum. Here's our Waikato reporter, Andrew McRae.
James Casson, a former police officer and now an immigration department worker, was elected a city councillor in October 2016, receiving just over 6,000 votes. He also ran for mayor but came in 4th. Hamilton's Mayor Andrew King's in no doubt what he thinks of his councillor's social media comments.
I don't agree with anything Councillor Casson has said. I don't endorse what he said.
Mr Casson plans again to try for the council's top job in local government elections later this year. 2 other mayoral candidates, both sitting councillors, have spoken out against James Casson's Facebook post. Paula Southgate was shocked and surprised when she first saw the comments.
Firstly, I don't share those points of view whatsoever, and I'm acutely aware that the wider community and the Muslim community of New Zealand are still in shock and mourning about this terrible event.
Angela O'Leary has been a councillor for 12 years. She's very concerned that an elected member of council and someone representing the city would respond to the events in Christchurch in such a way.
I have no doubt that there will be many complaints coming from the public on this issue. This is not who New Zealanders are, and it's not who Hamiltonians are either.
The city's Deputy Mayor Martin Gallagher says while James Casson has done some good things on council, particularly around community safety, he's made a huge error of judgment this time.
Perhaps stop and think about what you're about to say, and in the case of the recent awful tragedy, use the Prime Minister's approach as a bit of a case study in incredible compassionate leadership, and also the ability perhaps to interact with our Muslim community and listen to their feelings.
Out on the streets of Hamilton today, I didn't find any support for Mr Casson's views.
I think that his timing is really poor. And not only that, I think it's quite a redneck reactionary kind of thing for him to say. And he's just got it all wrong.
I wonder if he's been in a box for the last 3 weeks, because it surprises me that anyone could have an opinion like that in the face of what we've just been through. It just seems crazy.
I think we need to be careful what we do around those sort of things, yeah.
And particularly coming from a city councillor?
Yeah, they shouldn't be politically motivated, I don't think.
Do you think his views necessarily reflect the city's views?
No.
That's not fair for him to say that we shouldn't commemorate it. I mean, that was the call the government made, the people made. Look at the turnout. I mean, Dunedin, Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, Hamilton. I mean, you know, we've got to support each other as a country.
I don't think he's seeing the bigger picture, which is basically that people are grieving and that needs to be acknowledged, and we need to see a way forward. And I think Jacinda Ardern's doing everything possible to make that possible.
The Mayor, Andrew King, says Mr Casson hasn't broken the council's code of conduct and can't be censured. But fellow councillor Angela O'Leary doesn't agree.
Now, if the public goes directly to the Mayor and makes a complaint, he is an elected member. So he has the authority and, in fact, the responsibility, because he's the leader of council, to enforce that code of conduct. So I'm interested in his views and the CE's on that, because certainly, in my understanding of the code of conduct, this is quite a serious breach.
James Casson says the posting was never meant to cause offence and has been taken out of context.
My point was to try and move on with normal life, because the more we get entrenched, the longer it's going to take, because, armed police at mosques and everything, the followers have to walk past armed police each day to go to their mosque, and that's not right for them either. Things have to get back to normal, otherwise tourism wins. That's the point I was trying to make.
He says he still stands by comments he made online in July 2016 about Middle Eastern refugees in Europe.
I was actually talking about the terrorists, not the refugees. So there were 2 terrorist attacks in Nice and Paris, and that was what I was referring to. And the boatloads of military-aged guys arriving on the beaches and wandering through Europe.
Immigration New Zealand, which employs James Casson, says it doesn't support his comments and is committed to supporting the victims and families of those affected by the Christchurch attacks. And it says, as Mr Casson's comments are an employment matter, it's unable to make any further comment. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Corps Andrew McRae-Tene.
And as you can imagine, a stream of feedback coming in on the text. I just want to read out an email I've got here from Steve about James Casson. He says, James Casson is so uninformed. He comes across as someone who has very little understanding of the refugee situation in Europe. Steve says, I'm aghast that he's working for Immigration New Zealand, where he should have more empathy for these unfortunate people. Why is he not called the white nationalists in Europe scum? It's clear from what's happened in Christchurch that we've been turning a blind eye to white nationalists who are alive and well just under the surface in New Zealand. Steve goes on to say that James Casson came on the program to try and have a bob each way. As we heard in Andrew's piece there, he certainly is sort of apologising, but also saying that he supports his comments, saying he's only talking about the terrorists, but then talking about all the men who are arriving in Europe. Steve says the man should resign. He's certainly done a lot to give heart to the right-wing, white supremacist parts of society. And then on the text, ratepayers of Hamilton, thank goodness council elections take place this year. Another person is saying, do the right thing and get rid of this two-faced individual. Cannot decide whether he's racist or stupid. Either way, he should be gone. Some strong views coming to us over the text as well as the email. Get in touch 2101 or checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Coming up to 23 minutes past 6, the Human Rights Commission wants the government to consider changing the law to protect religious groups against hate speech, something that's also supported by the country's Federation of Muslim Associations. The Justice Minister Andrew Little has said he wants to speed up the process to review New Zealand's hate crime laws, of course in the wake of the terrorist attack in Christchurch. But the National Party, while supporting the review, says it will have to be careful not to remove freedom of speech principles. And the ACT Party totally rejects any such change. Matthew Tunison reports.
As it stands, there's no law preventing hate speech being directed at someone who's walking down the street on the basis of their religion. It's anomalies like this which has Mr. Little moving to fast-track a law that could see a new legal offence for hate crimes. The Human Rights Commission has long called for such a review, and its chief legal advisor, Janet Anderson-Bidwar, says the Christchurch terrorist attack shows why.
We have current laws around that in the Human Rights Act, but those laws only cover race, colour, ethnic or national origins. So they don't cover hostility directed at people or groups because of their religion, and they don't cover sexual orientation or gender or disability or other grounds that are covered in other areas of the Human Rights Act.
Such hostility can be taken as aggravating factors when someone is sentenced in court, but they aren't currently crimes in of themselves. Hate speech online is covered by the Harmful Digital Communications Act, but that's of no use to anyone who's abused face-to-face because of their religion, sexual orientation or disability. In addition to revisiting the law, the Commission is calling for the government to create a register to monitor complaints and convictions for hate crimes.
So it might not change the offence that someone's charged with, but it's actually really, really important for us to know that a crime was committed because a person was gay or because they were a particular colour or because of their gender identity or a disability.
While raising concerns about what a law change could mean for free speech, the National Party leader Simon Bridges has given his conditional support for such a review. ACT's David Seymour, on the other hand, has come out strongly opposed, arguing it would divide the country and pit groups against one another.
The Sentencing Act already not only allows but requires judges to consider whether a crime was aggravated by hostility towards a person based on their race or colour or national origins.
The president of the New Zealand Federation of Islamic Associations, Mustafa Farouk, disagrees.
Why can't we just open that and include faith groups? Any faith group, not only Muslim, whether it is Jewish community, whether it is Hindu, whether it is Sikhs or Christian groups, any other group that profess a certain faith, if somebody makes certain statements that incite someone to harm these individuals, that person should be held responsible.
Mr. Farouk says he's heard many stories of Muslims who have been the targets of hate speech, and now is the time to do something about it.
There are laws that were put together in many countries around the world against Muslims who, make, hate speeches or make speeches that are considered hateful or insightful. Why can't these laws be extended to everyone?
Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says it's a debate the country needs to have.
But that said, let's look at this with some balance. I've seen hate language from the left and the right, usually the extreme left and the extreme right, in an environment where no one in the middle of either the modest right or the modest left would tolerate it. So we need to be careful here, but certainly I think we need to look at it.
Andrew Little says he hopes to produce a proposal in relation to hate crimes by the end of this year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Matthew Tunison.
26.5 minutes past 6. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's AK party has lost control of several big cities and local elections, including the capital, Ankara. The poll is being seen as a referendum on his leadership. In Istanbul, both the opposition and AK party have declared victory, with the tally still very close. The BBC's Mark Lowen is there.
There is a saying in Turkish, whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey. Tonight, the biggest prize in the local elections is too close to call, with fewer than 3,000 votes between the governing AK party and the opposition CHP in a city of 18 million people. While both sides have declared victory, the official tally by the state news agency has stopped, with over 1% of votes still to count, which the CHP have claimed is the government's way of stealing the result. In the capital Ankara, the opposition has won back control after a quarter of a century. If it takes Istanbul too, it would be an astonishing result in a country where 90% of the media is pro-government and President Erdogan has branded his opponents terrorists. Speaking to supporters in Ankara, there was none of the usual triumphalism from the president, but instead a call to wait for official results to be published and remarks that seemed to be an acceptance of defeat in several parts of the country.
I believe the only reason we couldn't get the results we wanted in some cities is that we couldn't express ourselves enough to our nation and we failed to win their hearts.
His usually loyal Conservative voters have indeed punished him for a deepening recession, with inflation at 20% and the currency plunging in value. For years, Mr. Erdogan appeared unbeatable with a moribund opposition. Tonight, that image is beginning to change.
That's Mark Lowen in Turkey. And just before we go, a bit more feedback. People are getting in touch again on James Caston's interview, the councillor of Hamilton City Council. Betty's been in touch on Twitter and says James Caston mealy-mouthed. He knows how to sound reasonable, doesn't he? Glad he's not getting an easy ride. He's just sorry he got caught and now his job is under threat. It's scary to consider how many more civil servants might share his view. And with the hashtag systemic racism, that's from Betty on Twitter. There's a little bit of feedback as well. Regarding the terrible day. 9 people died on our roads today. Phil has some comment here on the road laws, particularly around licensing. He says, let's start getting serious about driving. Have a look at the age qualification and the time and expense it takes just to get a provisional licence in Germany. The ludicrous ease with which a young person gets a licence here is pitiful, and the robotic answers of the head of traffic policing shows we've adopted the ostrich position. Driving's a privilege, not a right, and it must be valued with ability from the outset. Thanks, Phil, for getting in touch. Thanks for all of you for your feedback and for tuning in. From me, Alex Perrottet, and all the Checkpoint team, ka kite anō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. 2 people are in a serious condition in hospital and 9 are dead after 3 car crashes around the country this morning. Cabinet has approved changes to gun laws in the wake of the Christchurch massacre. A Hamilton City Councillor under fire for criticising the country's response to the mosque attacks says he will apologise to the Muslim community. And the Auditor-General says the Social Development Ministry last year gave winter energy payments to beneficiaries and superannuitants who were not eligible for them. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Our own stories and the way that we tell them and the people that we tell them about are really important at times like this.
With local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
My drummer's dog, he sometimes comes in, but he doesn't like the noise too much.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people